and you take that away because you're angry. Well, I'm angry too. Y'all stay prayed up.
A Facebook post. A broken marriage. What should have been the beginning of freedom from an abusive husband turned into something far darker. Instead of separating from her marriage, April Kelley was separated from life itself. Her voice silenced, her future stolen, and her story ending in the most tragic way possible. This is not just the story of a crime. It is the unraveling of a marriage poisoned by jealousy, control, and rage. A story where the warning signs were written in plain sight, but no one stopped the tragedy that was about to unfold. April Kelley, 45 years old, a hard-working woman, a mother, a grandmother, daughter, a friend, and a woman fighting for her freedom. And Ricky Kelley, 48 years old, her estranged husband, consumed by anger, bitterness, and a fragile ego that could not handle rejection. Together, their names would forever be linked to a shocking murder-suicide in Colbert, Georgia. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality: how easily words posted online can become windows into the darkest corners of the human mind, and how silence in the face of threats can cost lives. Welcome to True Crime Cave, your hideout for chilling true crime stories, unsolved mysteries, and the harsh truths of human nature. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and join this community. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we uncover the lessons that hide within them. Tonight, we take you inside the twisted story of April and Ricky Kelley, where a crumbling marriage, a Facebook comment, and a storm of rage led to one of the most heartbreaking crimes you'll ever hear. April Kelley was 45 years old, a teacher, a daughter, a friend, and a woman who valued peace more than anything. To those who knew her, she wasn't simply another face in the community. She was the kind of person whose presence brought calm, whose words carried warmth, and whose life reflected resilience. Teaching was more than a job for April. It was an extension of her character. Her classroom was not just a place where lessons were written on the board. It was where she poured herself into shaping lives, offering guidance, and giving children the kind of encouragement every young heart needs. Her colleagues spoke of her dedication. Her students remember her patience. She was steady, dependable, and deeply committed to her work. But April's life was not only about her profession. She was known for her closeness to her family, her parents, her aunts, her extended relatives. She leaned on them, and they leaned on her. Weekends, gatherings, conversations, and small moments of laughter, those were the places she found joy and strength. Her friends, too, spoke of her as loyal and kind, someone who would listen without judgment and offer help without hesitation. For April, relationships mattered. She built them with care, and she protected them fiercely. Unlike many who let work consume them, she held on to her connections, treating them like lifelines. And in truth, they were. Her ties to her family and friends were what kept her grounded when life at home became more difficult than anyone should ever have to bear. What set April apart was her quiet determination to choose peace even in the face of conflict. She did not crave attention, nor did she live a loud or reckless life. She wanted stability, a safe home, and the freedom to breathe without fear. To the outside world, she was simply a hard-working woman navigating middle age with dignity. But to those closest to her, she was far more: a light in their lives, a steady hand, a reminder that even in a chaotic world, kindness and patience still mattered. And yet, behind her calm presence and hard-working spirit, April was also carrying a weight. The strain of living with a man whose temper and control cast shadows over her attempts to build a peaceful life she so deeply wanted. That weight would grow heavier with time, and her fight for freedom would bring her face to face with the darkest danger of all. April married Ricky Kelley, a man 3 years older than her. At first glance, their marriage looked ordinary. Two adults in their 40s trying to build a stable life together in Colbert, Georgia. But beneath that appearance, tension was already growing. What began as a partnership soon shifted into a pattern of control, conflict, and fear. Ricky was not known for patience. Friends and relatives noticed his jealousy, his constant need to monitor and question. April, who thrived on peace and independence, often found herself shrinking under his shadow. He wanted control over her time, her choices, and sometimes even her voice. What outsiders couldn't see was the emotional storm that built behind closed doors. April worked long hours. Teaching consumed her days, but some believe it also served another purpose. It gave her distance from home. Her job became both a calling and an escape, a place where she could be respected, heard, and free from the constant tension waiting for her when she returned. The signs of abuse began to show. Words used as weapons, arguments that left scars invisible to the eye, but heavy on the heart. There were moments when anger slipped into physical intimidation, reminders that April lived a marriage where safety was no longer guaranteed. And through it all, she carried herself with quiet strength, trying to protect her dignity while navigating a husband whose behavior grew more unstable with time. Ricky's jealousy was relentless. He wanted her attention, her presence, her obedience. To him, control equaled love. But to April, it was suffocating. She found herself walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every action, in an effort to avoid setting him off. This wasn't the marriage she had hoped for. What was supposed to bring stability had become the very source of her unrest. Yet, like so many survivors of domestic violence, April stayed, perhaps out of hope that things could change, perhaps out of fear of what might happen if she left. And that's the tragedy of stories like April's. To the world outside, marriages often look intact until they collapse. But behind closed doors, lives are quietly unraveling. The cycle of control, manipulation, and abuse rarely begins with violence. It begins with words, suspicion, and the slow erosion of someone's spirit. April's marriage to Ricky Kelley was a storm she fought to weather. But storms, when ignored, only grow stronger. And for April, the path to freedom would soon come at the greatest cost. It only took a single comment to shatter whatever fragile balance was left in the Kelley marriage. On one of Ricky's Facebook posts, his former partner, the mother of his child, left a remark. To most people, it would have been harmless. But for Ricky, it cut deep. Insecurity, jealousy, and anger boiled to the surface. For April, this was a breaking point. The man who had already been controlling and abusive now seemed consumed by rage. The marriage that once drained her slowly had become unbearable. She decided she had had enough. This wasn't just about arguments anymore. This was about survival. April left Ricky, and in doing so, she stripped him of the one thing he had always demanded: control. That choice transformed him into something even more dangerous, an estranged husband with a bruised ego and an obsession he could not let go of. But April wasn't silent in her fear. About 2 weeks before the tragedy, she filed for a temporary protection order, a TPO. It was a desperate but courageous act, a legal barrier meant to create distance and provide safety, a piece of paper that carried the weight of her cry for help. For April, the TPO was proof she understood the danger. For Ricky, it was a confirmation that she no longer wanted him in her life. From that moment, his bitterness sharpened. He began blaming everyone: April's parents, her friends, even her aunt, accusing them of turning her against him. He vented on Facebook, turning his rage into public outbursts. His words revealed a man unraveling, lashing out at anyone he thought stood between him and his wife. April, meanwhile, tried to hold on to her peace. She worked, she leaned on her family, and she tried to move forward. But Ricky's obsession lingered like a shadow. He was no longer a partner. He was a threat circling closer each day. That Facebook comment was never just a comment. For Ricky, it became fuel for his resentment. For April, it became the moment she realized she had to save herself. And yet, even with courage, even with the TPO, the danger was already set in motion. Ricky wasn't ready to let go. He was ready to destroy. Ricky's rage did not stay behind closed doors. He carried it to the one place where he knew he could be heard, Facebook, through late-night posts and Facebook Live sessions. His words grew darker, sharper, and more alarming. His tone wasn't simply angry. It was bitter, cryptic, and laced with menace. Anyone scrolling past might have mistaken them for the ramblings of a frustrated man. But to those who knew the context, they were chilling hints of what he might do next. The temporary protection order had cornered him, and instead of stepping back, Ricky went on the offensive. He ranted that April had been turned against him. He lashed out at her parents, accusing them of poisoning her mind. He singled out her aunt and her closest friends, blaming them for destroying his marriage. To Ricky, accountability never belonged to him. His pain was someone else's fault, and his bitterness demanded an audience. Yet, the most disturbing part wasn't what he said. It was how easily his words were ignored. Red flags that waved openly on a public platform. And still, no one moved fast enough. The posts remained just that, posts, until they became a chilling prophecy. Looking back, it's clear, Ricky wasn't venting. He was unraveling. He was announcing his state of mind to the world. He was giving warning after warning, but the warnings were brushed aside, and the danger grew louder with every keystroke, every video, every angry declaration. And here's where I turn to you, the viewer. Be honest with yourself. If you had seen Ricky's posts in real time, angry, cryptic, hinting at violence, what would you have done? Would you have scrolled past and ignored them? Would you have raised an alarm? Or would you have quietly suspected something terrible was about to happen? Tell us in the comments. Because sometimes what we choose to ignore can decide whether tragedy is prevented or repeated. October 7th, 2024. A date that would forever fracture the lives of April's family and everyone who loved her. That day began like any other, but for April Kelley, it ended in terror. She was still in the process of trying to separate herself from a man who refused to let go. Ricky, angry, consumed, and spiraling out of control, was no longer her husband. He was her estranged husband, a man driven by rage and humiliation. And on that day, his obsession reached its final breaking point. Reports detail that Ricky confronted April. The encounter wasn't random, and it wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. A confrontation filled with the anger of a man who felt betrayed, abandoned, and exposed. To him, April's decision to walk away had stripped him of power. And in that loss, he believed the only way to regain control was to take away the very life she had reclaimed. With a firearm in hand, Ricky made his choice. The argument reached its climax, and in a moment of violence, he pulled the trigger. April Kelley, daughter, teacher, friend, loved one, was gunned down by the very person who once vowed to protect her. The tragedy didn't end there. Not long after, Ricky was found dead nearby. The evidence made it clear. After killing April, he turned the gun on himself. A murder-suicide. Two lives ended in one chain of violence. For the community of Colbert, Georgia, the shock was overwhelming. Neighbors who had seen April as a bright and compassionate woman struggled to process the reality that her life was stolen in such a brutal way. Friends and family who had known Ricky saw the devastating conclusion of his anger, his bitterness, and his untreated demons. In one violent act, Ricky silenced April's voice. But in turning the gun on himself, he also confirmed what many suspected. This was not love, it was control. Not partnership, but possession. And when possession slipped through his fingers, he chose destruction over acceptance. Two lives ended. But the impact of that day continues to ripple, leaving behind grief, unanswered questions, and a community scarred by what should never have happened. Ricky Kelley was a man built on control. To outsiders, he might have blended into the background of Colbert, Georgia, a 48-year-old husband, someone you might pass in town without a second thought. But the truth that April knew all too well, was very different. Behind closed doors, Ricky's world revolved around dominance, jealousy, and intimidation. Like many abusers, Ricky's behavior wasn't always loud. Sometimes it lived in the quieter patterns, the constant criticism, the cutting remarks, the pressure to put him first at all costs. April's friends noticed she worked long hours, almost as though her job was a refuge. The classroom, for her, became more than a workplace. It was an escape from the verbal assaults and the suffocating control she endured at home. To understand Ricky's character, you have to see the building blocks. He was deeply insecure, and insecurity mixed with entitlement is a dangerous combination. He disrespected April, but he also disrespected the very idea of equality in a marriage. He wanted power, not partnership. One of Ricky's greatest sources of bitterness was April's closeness to her family. Her parents, her aunties, her circle of friends. They were her anchors. They gave her strength, reminded her that she had value beyond what Ricky allowed. To a secure partner, that would have been a blessing. But to Ricky, it was a threat. Abusers thrive on isolation. They want their partners cut off from support systems, so they can manipulate without resistance. Every dinner with family, every phone call to a friend chipped away at the control Ricky thought he had, and that fueled his jealousy. Not the jealousy people usually imagine, not another man, not an affair. No, Ricky's jealousy was rooted in April's independence, in the fact that she could still reach beyond him, that she still had people in her corner who loved her unconditionally. To him, that bond was competition, and he despised it. When April finally left, Ricky's carefully constructed world collapsed. His fragile ego could not absorb a blow. Her leaving wasn't just a personal loss. To him, it was humiliation. It shattered the image he projected of himself, not only to others but to himself. And that, for Ricky, was intolerable. So he turned outward, seeking validation, lashing out in public spaces like Facebook. His posts, his live streams, they weren't random. They were an attempt to reclaim power, to broadcast his anger, and to paint himself as the victim of betrayal. But if you listen closely to the words, if you strip away the rage, what's left is clear entitlement. He believed April belonged to him. He believed her family was meddling. He believed her friends were enemies. Everyone else became the problem. Everyone except Ricky himself. This is the profile of an abuser. Controlling, isolating, always pointing fingers, never taking responsibility. They rewrite the story so they never have to admit fault. And Ricky fit that mold perfectly. His ego was fragile, his pride outsized, and his respect non-existent. But in the end, all of that anger, all of that bluster, led him to a choice that revealed the truth. By killing April, He didn't prove strength by taking his own life. He didn't restore his pride. What he proved, in the clearest terms, was his own weakness. He was a coward who could not face accountability, a coward who would rather destroy than accept rejection. April's choice to leave required courage. She stood against years of control and chose freedom. Ricky's response, violence and escape through suicide, showed the opposite. He lacked the strength to face life without her, and he lacked the humility to admit his failures as a husband. His story is not unique. Too many abusers follow the same pattern. They demand control. They isolate their partners, and when their grip slips, they lash out. Ricky Kelley was not an exception. He was a tragic example of what happens when unchecked control festers into violence. And that is his legacy. Not strength, not love, not even heartbreak. Just a coward's act of destruction that left behind pain, questions, and a reminder that the face of abuse can live anywhere, even behind the smile of someone you think you know. Walking away from a marriage should never cost someone their life. Separation is meant to be a step toward healing, not a death sentence. Yet for April Kelley, choosing her freedom meant confronting the darkest side of the man she once trusted. Her story reminds us of something uncomfortable but necessary to face. Abuse doesn't always begin with violence. It often starts with words, with control, with a slow erosion of independence. It thrives in jealousy and disrespect. In the subtle ways one person diminishes another. By the time the bruises appear, whether on the skin or in the soul, the pattern has already taken root. Recognizing it early isn't just important, it's vital. April filed for protection order. That step, as difficult as it was, spoke volumes. It meant she felt threatened enough to call on the law to protect her. And yet, a piece of paper could not shield her from a man determined to destroy what he could not control. This reality forces us to ask, are we doing enough to protect victims when they speak up? And then there's the digital space, the posts, the live streams, the angry words Ricky spilled into the public eye. He told the world he was breaking. He revealed his rage in real time. But those warnings went unnoticed, brushed off as ramblings until it was too late. How many tragedies could be prevented if online threats were taken seriously? If disturbing signs on social media were seen as cries for help or as calls for intervention? Domestic violence thrives in silence. It grows when neighbors ignore the shouting, when friends excuse the jealousy, when family dismisses the threats. Silence is the abuser's shield. Awareness breaks that shield. Speaking out, paying attention, stepping in. These are not small acts. They are lifelines. Ricky Kelley's actions also expose another reality, the intersection of abuse and mental instability. His unraveling showed not only control and entitlement, but also a mind clouded by rage, obsession, and despair. Addressing mental health, especially in those who display patterns of aggression, isn't just compassion, it's prevention. Ignored instability can become lethal. April Kelley's story is heartbreaking, but it's also familiar to far too many. Behind the statistics, behind the headlines, are countless men and women who live through the same cycle of fear, control, and abuse every single day. So I want to pause here and ask you, the audience, something very real. Have you ever found yourself or someone you love in a relationship where things didn't feel right? Maybe it started small. A partner who checked your phone, got jealous when you spent time with friends, or questioned every move you made. At first, it seemed like concern, but over time, it began to feel suffocating. Have you seen that before? Maybe you watched a friend or family member go through it. You could see the signs, the change in their personality, the way they grew distant, the way they always seemed to walk on eggshells. Did you ever wonder if you should step in? Did you struggle with whether it was your place, or fear that speaking up might push them further into isolation? Or perhaps you've been the one who had to make that impossible choice, to walk away from someone you once loved because the love turned into control, into fear, into danger. If that's you, what gave you the strength to leave? And if you've never been through it yourself, ask yourself honestly, if you saw someone you care about posting disturbing messages online, hinting at anger, jealousy, or even violence, what would you do? Would you scroll past, assume it was just venting? Would you call them, or maybe alert someone who could help? Share your thoughts, your stories, your experiences in the comments, not just for us here at True Crime Cave, but for everyone listening. Because sometimes one person's story can become another person's survival guide. Sometimes your words could be exactly what someone else needs to hear to take that first step towards safety. So what lessons do we carry from April's story? That no one should ever feel unsafe in their own home. That leaving should not be dangerous. That threats, whether spoken in private or shouted on Facebook Live, must be treated as serious. And that the cycle of abuse ends only when it's recognized, confronted, and acted upon. April Kelley's life, her courage to walk away, and her tragic death stand as both a warning and a call. A warning of what happens when control and violence go unchecked, and a call to each of us to stay aware, to believe victims, and act before silence turns into another name lost to violence. April Kelley was more than headlines, more than a tragic statistic. She was a mother, a friend, a woman who wanted nothing more than peace after years of turmoil. She sought freedom. She sought safety, and she sought a chance to rebuild her life. That was her right. It is every person's right. But her story did not end in freedom. It ended in blood, in grief, and in questions that will echo long after the cameras stop rolling. What does it say about us, as families, as neighbors, as society, when someone can cry out for help, take legal steps to protect themselves, and still fall to violence at the hands of the one who once vowed to love them? The truth is chilling in its simplicity. April sought peace. Ricky chose violence. And in the end, love twisted into control destroyed them both. Those words should not fade when the video ends. They should stay with us as a warning, as a lesson, and as a call to never look away again. So tonight, we remember April Kelley not for the way her life ended, but for the strength it took to walk away, for the courage it took to demand safety, and for the voice she gave to countless others who are still trapped in silence. Her story now belongs to all of us, and what we do with it will determine whether her death was only a tragedy or also a turning point. And now, I want to leave you with this. If you or someone you know is living in fear, do not wait. Speak. Reach out. Call for help. Awareness can save lives, and silence can cost them. If this story moved you, subscribe for more true stories that demand to be told. Share your thoughts in the comments, not just about April, but about the changes you believe need to happen. Because awareness spreads when we speak, and sometimes one voice can be the lifeline another person is waiting for. Thank you for staying with us through the end of this story. April Kelley's case is painful, but it's also a reminder of why we need to keep these conversations alive. If you've shared your thoughts or experiences, know that someone else out there might draw strength from your words. And if you found value in this video, stay tuned, because more powerful, eye-opening true crime stories are on the way. Each one sheds light on the hidden dangers around us and the lessons we can all take to protect ourselves and those we love. So don't forget to subscribe, share this video, and come back for more. At True Crime Cave, every story matters and every voice counts.